Hello everyone, my name is Charlie. I am a second year PhD student at the University of Queensland in Brisbane, Australia. And I'm really excited to talk to you about some of the work that I've been doing with my PhD so far, looking at pathways to conventional versus radical collective action. I want to acknowledge my supervisors, Professor Kelly Fielding and Professor Lewis, and I want to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the land on which I live and study, the Yagara and Turrbal people of Mianjin, whose sovereignty was never ceded. Alright, so climate change is often positioned as a classic social dilemma. Mitigation behaviours that benefit the collective often clog the self, and there's no guarantee that everyone else will make this sacrifice too. But unfortunately, this is not the only kind of dilemma that climate change has claim to. It's also a temporal dilemma. Despite recognition that climate change impacts are being felt all around the world already, the fact remains that climate change happens over a really long period of time, poses a bigger threat to the future than it does to the present, and the things that most people can do about climate change generally require a sort of blind faith that eventually, in the future, they will have an impact. This poses a problem for climate change mitigation. The future is a slippery concept for people to grasp. The present is certain, the future is not. Consequently, a delay between a choice and its outcomes weakens how motivating these outcomes are. As such, people tend to preference smaller rewards and choose to avoid smaller adverse outcomes that are closer in time than larger ones. This phenomenon, known as delayed discounting, is a pretty significant barrier to climate action given the scale of time involved. Luckily, while delayed discounting is a universal human phenomenon, not all people engage in it to the same degree. Future-oriented people engage in less delayed discounting than people who are more present-oriented and accordingly tend to display more pro-environmental attitudes and higher rates of pro-environmental behaviour. In the environmental space, future orientation is measured in a few different ways, but often is measured as the extent to which someone considers the future consequences of their behaviour and the extent to which they value them relative to present outcomes. Pro-environmental behaviour in turn is typically conceptualised as occurring in either the private or the public spheres. Private sphere pro-environmental behaviour refers to individual choices and behaviours that have a direct impact on the environment, and public sphere behaviour refers to advocacy, generally of a collective nature, that seeks to indirectly impact the environment by influencing others' choices or government policy. And consideration of future consequences has been found to predict both private and public sphere climate action. However, this research really only looks at conventional, socially acceptable forms of climate action, like personal lifestyle choices and marches and petitions. But other forms of collective action, like disruptive radical action, for example, civil disobedience, are driven by entirely different variables and are comparatively understudied. So, we know that future-oriented individuals take more conventional climate action. Developmental research has established that future orientation actually inhibits risky behaviour in adolescence. The argument being that the more you think about the potential adverse future outcomes of a behaviour, and the more important it is to you to avoid those, then the less likely you are to engage in said risky behaviour. As such, we were interested in whether consideration of future consequences still had this positive association with climate action was radical in nature, given that this form of climate action may be associated with negative future consequences like arrest and even jail time, at least within Australia. Comparatively, consideration of immediate consequences is the sort of present-oriented counterpart to consideration of future consequences. People high on this variable tend to be more motivated by short-term outcomes and are less put off by the possibility of adverse outcomes in the future. They also take less conventional climate action. However, given their value placed on actions with short-term outcomes, we hypothesized maybe the sort of more immediate nature of radical climate action might appeal to them more. So the aim of the first study of my PhD was to sort of bridge these areas of research to see how temporal orientation predicted intentions to engage in three different forms of climate action: conventional private sphere, conventional public sphere, and radical public sphere climate action. To do this, we used a representative sample of 76 adults from Queensland, Australia, and we oversampled young adults. So we expected that consideration of future consequences would be positively related to intentions to engage in conventional private and public sphere climate actions, and negatively related to intentions to engage in radical public sphere climate action. And then we expected the opposite relationships for consideration of immediate consequences. We also explored two possible mediators, access to environmental cognitive alternatives and climate anxiety, which I'll just briefly contextualize. So cognitive alternatives emerged from social identity theorizing about engagement in collective action, and Wright and colleagues have recently been extending this concept to the environmental space. And the idea is that people are able to imagine a world in which humans and nature coexist harmoniously, tend to have higher activist identification and higher pro-environmental activism intentions. And this variable is also positively related to consideration of future consequences, and our theorizing was that people who are more future-oriented by nature might be more meant to engage in this kind of environment-specific future-oriented thinking, and that would drive the future orientation into action. And then similarly, future-oriented people are found to have higher rates of climate anxiety, which we also know is related to more climate action. And then so all expected that consideration of future consequences would directly be negatively associated with radical public sphere climate action intentions. We thought that there might be some positive indirect pathways, these mediator variables. So regarding our results, we replicated past work showing positive direct relationships between consideration of future consequences and private and public sphere climate action, and the opposite for consideration of immediate consequences, as we expected. And then we extended this by showing that consideration of future consequences had no relationship to radical climate action intentions, but we did find the expected positive relationship between consideration of immediate consequences and radical climate action intentions. And as far as we are aware, this is the first evidence of a positive relationship between present orientation and any kind of pro-environmental behaviour. Expectations about possible mediators were also upheld. Both environmental cognitive alternatives and climate anxiety partially mediated the relationship between consideration of future and immediate consequences and intentions to engage in all three kinds of climate action. And these circle variables here that I wanted to draw your attention to, we expected to see the same sort of opposing relationships between future and present orientation and the mediator variables that we saw with conventional private and public sphere climate action intentions. However, we actually found that both consideration of future and immediate consequences were positively associated with environmental cognitive alternatives and climate anxiety. So this is particularly interesting to us, and we thought that maybe this is a result of people in Australia perceiving climate change as a very present threat after several consecutive years of very salient climate change impacts. And so we are hoping to, we'll have a look to see if we can replicate this in future research and see if that holds up. And we also expected that people who had access to more environmental alternatives, that those people would have less climate anxiety, but we actually saw that they had more climate anxiety. We also noted that most of the existing environmental collective action research had been conducted on young adults, so we ran a multi-group model across age group, young adults versus adults outside of this category, and confirmed that the model was robust to age. Okay, so to highlight our main findings and the implications, we found that intentions to engage in socially acceptable, low-risk forms of climate action were associated with future-mindedness, directly and indirectly via access to environmental cognitive alternatives and climate anxiety. Comparatively, we found that intentions to engage in non-normative or disruptive climate action appeared to be associated with present-mindedness. And this seems to support our hypothesis that the kinds of people who will engage in this sort of high-risk form of climate action are those who are less deterred by the potential future costs that this action is associated with. As I said, as far as we're aware, this is the first evidence of a positive relationship between pregnant orientation and any kind of pro-environmental outcome. And this really highlights the importance of measuring present and future orientation as two distinct constructs, as well as looking at how we conceptualize different kinds of climate action. Of note is our unexpected findings of positive relationships between consideration of immediate consequences, environmental cognitive alternatives, and climate anxiety. So at face value, we think this suggests that climate change is experienced as a threat in the present in our sample, as well as a future threat. And a review has highlighted that this is true in many other places in the world as well. So together, these positive associations between consideration of immediate consequences and climate change attitudes and behavioral intentions is extremely interesting. And if we are able to replicate this, then it spells pretty positive news for environmental advocates. We may well find that as more and more people experience the consequences of climate change and view climate change as a threat in the present, that everyone comes to the party regarding climate change action. So rather than thinking of present-minded people as impulsive or completely checked out from the future of climate change, it may be more helpful to think of these kinds of people as those who prioritize different kinds of action. And something that we are really looking forward to in the future is exploring how individual temporal orientation drives preferred tactics for social change.